Hey folks, it's Cameron from the Brushfire Mind, and this is coffee. If you check out the link down below in the description, you can find ways to support us by buying us more coffee. Okay, thanks.
Okay, Gash asks the question, how can a conservative be a Star Trek fan? Did they not live in a utopian, all-needs-met society that resembles the descriptions of communism?
Oh, they absolutely did, and that's why it's science fiction / fantasy. Lieutenant Commander Uhura, Nichelle Nichols, passed away this weekend. It's asked, she asks, is it time to go? Was I a good Starfleet officer? And Crackshot says something entirely inappropriate to the image, covering the bottom of the meme. You were the best. So, Uhura has been a somewhat controversial figure and character, because it was a big deal. It was a big deal when Uhura was first on Star Trek that there was a black female in an officer position. That was a big progressive push, and oh, hey, look, so-and-so can do anything as well as anybody else. And without going down the rabbit hole of whether or not women belong in the military, one of the things that's always bothered me about Uhura is the lefties that are critical of things of this sort would say, they put a black woman on Star Trek, but she's just a glorified secretary because that's all they think a black woman can do. Okay, I'm going to drop a little clarification on you. And when you hear this criticism in the future, well, she's still denigrated to just basically answering the phones. She was a communications officer, a commissioned officer in a military, and a communications officer. A communications officer is not a glorified secretary. You're talking about someone who is a linguist, a philologist, right? You're talking about somebody who is conducting combat communications operations, who is managing communications for a fleet vessel. All that's a big deal. When you're talking about somebody who is a military linguist, right? Let's take this to the real numbers for a moment. And this is why I was so happy to see that my wife and my dad are both watching this morning. They'll appreciate
and then there's your wife.
Numbers here.
She jumped ahead of us. She made the point for you.
So thing one, before we even get into those numbers, let me just make this very clear. If you've ever been in a war, there's an old adage: communication is the first casualty of war. And buddy, that is true. I cannot overemphasize how true that is. When I was standing in the desert just outside of Sanjare, returning fire, shooting men off a wall at 300 meters with my M16 in one hand and my radio in the other, calling in troops in contact for reinforcements. Tell you something, that shit's tricky. And just because you squeeze that button and say, tick, 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 troops in contact, doesn't mean anybody hears it. Now, let's get to the being a linguist part of it.
Let me pause you real quick because this is actually really important. Okay. The show, the original Star Trek, as conceived by Gene Roddenberry, went through a couple of permutations. Like originally, there was going to be a female first officer, for example. The final form that you saw on television that everybody is the most familiar with is that, yes, there's a white captain who had a literal alien for a first officer, who had a Japanese pilot and a Russian co-pilot and a black female communications officer. And nobody made a big deal out of it. In fact, a few times in the show's history, anytime race was mentioned, all the characters were like, what's wrong with you, dude? You stop being racist. Jesus. We gave that up hundreds of years ago. This was informed by the fact that Gene Roddenberry was in World War II. And so he viewed military service as a great equalizer. Now, he didn't want Starfleet to be a one-to-one analogy for the military, but that's what informed his worldview. That suddenly, when you were, he flew combat missions in Europe in World War II, and nobody cared what color you were. They cared if you could bring the plane back.
Yep.
Which was not a thing that happened terribly often if you flew several combat missions in Europe. You had a tendency to not be able to bring the plane back. So that's where Gene Roddenberry's view of this came from, and it was a truly equal situation. So anyhow, I felt it interesting to point out that the military and Gene Roddenberry's experience in the military is actually what informed this. I'll use the word progressive view because back then it wasn't a toxic shit word.
Right. And they make a big deal about it they make a bigger deal about it in some of the reboot movies, but Uhura, being a linguist and a philologist, in some of the newer movies, they made it a point to say that she's got like almost a mutant ability in her brain to retain the number of languages that she has, an extraordinary gift for languages.
So in other words, Uhura was quite literally one of the smartest people on the ship.
Right.
As in the black female who was just a token. Was one of the smartest people on the ship.
On the planet. Yes, Steve. Chapter and verse. Come on, I dropped one letter in a frickin' TFLA. It happens. So that the idea that she was merely a glorified secretary, guys, that just doesn't cut it, right? You have to do all of that in order to get to be an analyst, an interceptor, an interrogator, or even the spooky shit that I did that they're not even allowed to tell you about until you're qualified to be one of those other things, right? Uhura was an intellectual badass. And Willowbar says acronyms are another language you speak. God, I hate that you're right about that.
There's another piece to it. There's not just the true representation of, if you'd stop doing that, you'd stop dropping it.
Shut up.
Okay. It's not just the true representation of an egalitarian society that was depicted on screen in Star Trek, okay? There was also all the metatext that went along with it. One thing most of you that are Star Trek fans probably know is that Nichelle Nichols was frustrated with her place on the show. She herself was worried she was a glorified background character. And then she met Martin Luther King Jr., who said, no, honey, no, you're not. You serve an incredibly important, the fact that you're just a normal part of that show, there are so many black people where you're their favorite character. And so she stuck around. And kind of a good thing that she did, because Nichelle Nichols and William Shatner, and you can think William Shatner is a piece of shit all you want. I happen to know some of the behind the scenes of that. In fact, I think I sent you a link. In fact, I don't think I sent you a link. I know I sent you a link.
Okay.
It's in the... your dad says, did Star Trek have coffee? Yes, they did have coffee. And not only did they have coffee, but the Klingons took coffee and adopted it and started serving something called Raktajino, which is a play on cappuccino. It was Klingon coffee, and apparently that shit would wake you up. Scroll to the last 15-ish seconds. Yes, we're getting to the memes, and this is there's just some history here that's important. Okay, so, yes, first interracial kiss. You see William Shatner looking off in the distance there? That wasn't scripted. See, originally, Paramount wasn't real sure that they wanted that to, not Paramount, but CBS wasn't real sure they wanted that to end up on TV. So they filmed it from multiple angles. Yes.
All right, Chesterton. You're right. Prune juice is a true warrior's drink.
They filmed it from multiple angles. And so Shatner and Nichols got together and was like, okay, this is what we're going to do. When we actually go for the shot, we're going to turn in such a way where they have no choice but to use a shot that shows contact of our lips on screen. And that was Shatner actually looking at the production crew going, ha ha, fuck you, we got you. That's where that came from. So first interracial kiss aired on TV in the United States of America. So I just want to touch real quick. To a certain extent, I feel bad for the left because they've got to keep going for the firsts. Like somehow a truly important first like that one morphed into the first tranny mayor of a city of at least 30,000 people. And it's like, guys, you know, honestly, after Obama became president, it's like, seriously, Obama was the first biracial bastard-born president. It's after that,
He was also the first non-native.
I don't know what you're talking about, sir. But after that, I don't know what your first is anymore, like at all.
Oh, your first is a joke now. Your first is well, I'm not qualified for jobs, so,
Okay, Gash asks the question, how can a conservative be a Star Trek fan? Did they not live in a utopian, all-needs-met society that resembles the descriptions of communism?
Oh, they absolutely did, and that's why it's science fiction / fantasy. Communism is a pure fantasy. It's just like unicorns that shit gold nuggets and solve all your problems. There's not one.
And look, let me just say, I've heard this tired argument before, and it is a tired, pedantic argument. Part of the fantasy of Star Trek is that they had virtually unlimited resources, which is a thing that I don't think we'll ever actually achieve in reality. So when you say, oh, well, how can you be a fan of Star Trek? It was blah, 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 blah. Look, let's not forget, Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, literally debates the nature of creation. Like, it's called the Genesis missile. And then Star Trek 3, Kirk throws away his entire career to rescue a friend because now we're debating the nature of the soul.
And your mama's so fat that she outweighs the needs of the many.
And then even if you go back to the original series, it was very common for them to quote the Bible. James Kirk's favorite historical figure was Abraham Lincoln, the first Republican president. So how could a conservative be a fan of Star Trek? Well, it's easy. I'm a fan of things that are good. And that's why I don't like New Trek, because it's not good.
Right. And of course, if you're really paying attention to pop culture, the Deep needed to watch him some Star Trek and learn how correctly to steal aquatic mammals.